this Illinois cannabis legislative news update. So, the Illinois General Assembly is returning to session. I believe the Senate is reconvening this week, and I believe the House is expected to return shortly thereafter. But don't quote me on any of that. I've not been paying attention to exactly what their schedule looks like this year. I will say I was just listening to some Springfield talk radio, and they said something to the effect, and I don't know exactly what they meant by this, so I can follow up on it in the future. But they said something to the effect of this year's schedule is exceptional or maybe unique in a way. So do some research on it, I guess, and compare it to last sessions. But as a reminder, no cannabis related legislation had advanced during our last legislative session. We're talking the cannabis omnibus package, which was supported by some stakeholders and people from the Cannabis Equity Illinois Coalition for sure. It included provisions like allowing craft growers to start at their maximum 14,000 square feet. I believe it had some language with regard to like distribution centers. It was extremely popular and supported by the community because it would have allowed medical patients to shop at all adult use dispensaries and do that at the medical cannabis tax rate. So, unfortunately, it did not move any at all during the last session. But from what I am hearing, and I guess I will just say that if you want a more in depth and unfiltered recap of the last session, listeners can check out episode 239 of the Cole Memo, which features boots on the ground perspectives from advocates who were lobbying or advocating on your behalf at the Capitol. So I'll put links to those interviews and reporting in the show notes. Based on what I'm hearing from advocates, both the cannabis probable cause proposal that was known as Senate Bill 42 and the broader cannabis omnibus, which I can't remember the bill number for right now, do remain under discussion and on the table as we head into this year. Some of the people I've talked to within the industry have expressed optimism that cannabis policy could finally move forward this year, with a few suggesting that recent developments around hemp may have cleared space for progress. I think what I remember, that was the comment from one individual, and they basically said something to the effect, well, now that hemp's out of the way, we can finally get our cannabis, legislation. It seems like that topic was often used as a reason for why cannabis policy hadn't been passed. I've just heard that it hasn't had the support that it needs, but who knows what the actual truth is. I'm just telling you what I've heard. So, on the cannabis probable cause front, the legislation is expected to return under a new bill number. So it's no longer going to be Senate Bill 42. It's currently being revised and sort of discussed, I would say, with like attorneys from certain counties and some civil liberties stakeholders. So the right people are at the table. I'll probably be there at the table. So once I have an updated draft and bill number, I'll definitely be sure to share that information. And as I said earlier, for the Cannabis Equity Omnibus, there's no bill assigned at this point. One point that remains unclear to me, and I always just try to be candid that I'm learning as I go. I like to make the joke that cannabis is a gateway drug. It's a gateway drug to politics, which is what I've been learning about for these last 6 years. And so, because Senate Bill 42 did pass the Senate, but never got called for a vote in the House, I'm under the impression that it could just pick up and be called in the House. But I could be extremely wrong about that exact point. So I'll follow up on that as I learn more about it. But I had heard that from an advocate, and I was surprised to hear that because I thought both measures, specifically what was Senate Bill 42, would have to go back through the Senate. And the thing that makes me feel like if it's going to go back through, that it will have to go back through the Senate is if it gets a new bill number. But alas, I'm not sure. I will share everything that I hear as it unfolds. You'll definitely hear about it. As you all know, I've been covering this specific subject in depth with legal professionals, advocates. I've been writing articles about it, and I'll put links in the show notes if you'd like to check out some of my work. So I know that a lot of comments are coming in, and I do apologize for not getting to them. I'll acknowledge them here in just a moment, but I will just say Illinois legalized cannabis. Well, they passed legislation to tax and regulate cannabis, as I like to say, in 2019, which of course was roughly 6 years ago. Since then, only three cannabis policy bills have been signed into law, and most of them have been narrowly focused on industry or technical changes rather than broad consumer or civil rights reforms, which is a lot of what I focus on. But I should give credit where credit is due. There have been some really good reforms since 2019 that I don't feel get enough focus. And so I just wanted to briefly cover them. And then I'll head on over to comments and try to acknowledge some of what you guys have been saying. So, just again, in the spirit of credit where credit is due, in December of 2019, Governor Pritzker signed Senate Bill 1557 into law. That legislation did two notable things. It required, this is a big one, by the way, this first one. It required the Secretary of State to remove medical cannabis patient and caregiver designations from people's driving records within 6 months. So I don't know if you remember this, but back in the day, if you had a medical card, cops could literally see your medical card holder status just by scanning your license plate, which is nuts because it's also, I'll just also add that I had a law enforcement officer do that because I wanted to see what it looked like when it showed up on their screen. And it's like literally in the section where your FOID and concealed carry license would appear. So it's like, can they have a gun? Can they conceal a gun? Oh, looks like they have cannabis. I just think it's funny that that information is all stored together because it seems unrelated, but uh, just an observation I had when I saw them when I let them scan my license plate. The other thing that 1557 did that nobody really gives credit for is I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it authorized local governments to allow on-premise cannabis consumption at dispensaries, which whatever. I think those, no offense, but the ones at dispensaries are lame. They're regulated by IDFPR and the rules are just like ridiculous. What was really cool was that it allowed retail tobacco stores open up consumption lounges. So if you had a retail tobacco license, and we've done interviews at a few of these locations, you can just open it up. In fact, I always say it's one of the easiest cannabis businesses to open up in the state because anybody can get a tobacco retail license. You just got to find a standalone building, and bingo, bango, bongo, you've got a Illinois cannabis consumption lounge. Now, I think the one trick you're going to have to figure out is how do you make money? But that's, business people, they figure that out. I will just say, like, I know Cannabis Critique was tuning in. Molly's joint is technically a consumption lounge licensed as a tobacco retail permit, which is why you're able to eat food inside. I mean, you could bring your own weed. There's a lot of flexibility that comes with doing that under the retail tobacco framework that I've heard IDFPR's rules have become more flexible with regard to consumption lounges, but long story short, I still think it's way overregulated. And if you're wondering, by the way, what I mean by IDFPR, IDFPR is the agency that licenses and regulates dispensaries. And so, as I mentioned, but just to make it a little bit more clear, there are two ways in which you can open up a cannabis consumption lounge in the state of Illinois. One, if you have a dispensary, and two, if you get a retail tobacco permit. Good luck getting a dispensary license. It's super easy to get a retail tobacco license. One more credit where credit is due. August 2021, Governor Pritzker signed HB 1443 into law, according to a fact sheet released by the Illinois Cannabis Regulation Oversight Office. The bill strengthened consumer protections by redefining a cannabis container to explicitly include the term resealable, which reduced the risk of law enforcement action based on claims that a container's seal had been broken. You broke the seal. It's like, yeah, as long as it's closed, I'm fine. You don't need to get me in trouble for that. And so that was a really big change that I felt benefited consumers specifically. So I definitely mentioned two changes: the medical cannabis notation on driving records, and the cannabis container being redefined. Look, credit where credit is due. That was some good policy, but it's been a while. And I think the only other piece of legislation, because I just mentioned two, there was one other piece of legislation that decoupled, just doing this off the top of my head right now, I don't even remember the legislation number, but it decoupled 280E at a state level. And then it took like $40 million, and this was reported by IllinoisNewsJoint.com, from the Medical Cannabis Patient Fund and transferred it over to the Cannabis Business Development Fund, which is insane when you consider that the Medical Cannabis Patient Fund is funded by medical cannabis patients, sick people. And to loosely quote Representative Bob Morgan, who I read this on the show recently, hell, I'm not going to be able to find it right now. It's in a recent episode, but he basically says, the Illinois medical cannabis program has an excess of money. And in the past, he proposed giving that money back to patients. So each patient would get like $250 because the program had too much money in it. Like it was only meant to fund staffing and, travel and other office related expenses. And they've ended up with a surplus. And part of that surplus went to funding cannabis businesses in the state of Illinois. Curious what you all think about that. I know a lot of comments have been coming in. I'm going to take a moment to read some comments, and then we will move on to our next story, which includes my recent appearance on a national cannabis news show. All right. So folks are saying the law is against crossing any state line, hoping that the move to Schedule 3 will help. Yeah, you got to hope. Oh, yes, I did enjoy the gift. That's what you were talking about. Brandon said it does seem that Mary's hemp line does have less THC in their package, which confuses me. Nice to know that there's a patch recipe. I'll be sure to share that. Yeah, that's one of the things that they did mention to me on the phone. It's like, a lot of people have been offering alternatives, but they're just like, look, we know this works and we appreciate alternatives. But we know this specific product works and we'd like access to it. Brandon said Senate Bill 42 is dead and has to be reintroduced. That lines up with what I'm hearing. They're saying that there's going to be a new number. I just was unclear. Somebody else had told me that it could pick up where it left off or something. And I was like, I don't think it can, but I don't know. I'm learning. Genetic Memory Farms asks the age-old question, did they legalize it though, or did they make more ways to throw us in jail? Well, according to defense attorney Evan Bruno, they just created new laws to throw people in jail and made a narrow carve-out for small possession of the plant. Cannabis Critique says it would be cool for a restaurant to have a small section for that. People would probably freak out. Yeah. Oh, you don't even get to skip the line at the only medical dispensary that would piss me off. The few times I have gone, I always enjoy being able to get priority because of my medical card. And Cole, that's great to hear. Cole Cram says Ventura is ready to put 42 back through the Senate, and it lines up with some things that I'm hearing. So really looking forward to that. Folks, I hope you're enjoying the show so far. We've got